They made her carry drinks, not knowing those same hands once brought entire concert halls to their feet. Tonight, a billionaire would try to humiliate her in front of 100 people dressed in silk and ego. What none of them knew, what even she had nearly forgotten, was that she didn't need their permission to be brilliant. She only needed a piano. The Harrow estate sparkled like a palace in a magazine spread, chandeliers glowing, wine pouring, violins humming in the background. Emily moved like part of the furniture, black uniform pressed, tray balanced in one hand, practiced smile on her face. Around her, guests laughed too loud, showed off just enough, and avoided eye contact with the staff unless it was to complain. No one knew her name. To them, she was just another girl serving champagne. But every so often, her eyes drifted, not to the rich guests or the gold leaf appetizers, but to the grand piano in the corner of the room, polished to perfection, untouched like an antique. She glanced at it the way a person might look at a home they lost a lifetime ago. The buzz of the party was constant, a mix of laughter, clinking glasses, and conversations that danced around power, money, and influence. Emily moved through this sea of privilege like a ghost, her black uniform blending into the shadows as she refilled champagne flutes and wiped fingerprints off crystal glasses. No one noticed her. They never did. But Mira, a seasoned waitress with tired eyes and a voice that carried the weight of years behind the service counter, leaned close as Emily passed by. "Remember, kid," she whispered, voice low and rough, "they don't want to see us dreaming. Dreaming is dangerous when you're on the wrong side of the velvet rope." Emily nodded, biting the inside of her cheek to keep her face neutral. Myra's words felt like a warning and a curse. Here, among these gilded walls and flawless smiles, ambition was a sin for people like her. The rich and powerful treated dreams like currency, and only those born with it could afford to spend it. But deep inside, a flicker refused to die. Emily's fingers itched, not to carry trays but to play, to make the keys sing beneath her touch like they once had. It was a secret she buried beneath layers of practicality and survival, the kind of talent that thrived in concert halls, not in the cold glare of this unyielding party. Myra's eyes caught hers again, softer now. "Don't let them see you feel anything. They'll use it against you." It was a truth written in every glance from a guest, every careless remark overheard in the kitchen. The unspoken rule was clear: keep your head down, your dreams hidden, your heart guarded. Because in this world, the higher they are, the harder they could fall, and no one would be there to catch you. And yet, the thought wouldn't leave Emily's mind. Talent doesn't ask for permission, she reminded herself. It doesn't care where you come from. It waits quietly until the moment you stop hiding it. Tonight, she told herself, maybe was that moment. The Harrow estate was a fortress of wealth, rising like a glittering castle on the outskirts of the city. Its walls whispered secrets of power and luxury, each room drenched in expensive taste, velvet curtains, golden chandeliers, and polished marble floors that reflected the flickering candlelight. The guests that night were a mix of industry titans, celebrities, and social climbers, all wearing their fortunes like armor, their laughter a little too loud, their smiles a little too sharp. Among them moved Emily, a young waitress whose presence barely registered to most. Dressed in the customary black uniform, her movements were precise but subdued, designed to be invisible. She had long since learned the dance of the invisible, the careful balance between efficiency and anonymity. Serve the drinks, clear the plates, smile when required, but never draw attention. But Emily's mind wasn't on the sparkling flutes or the crowd's forced pleasantries. Her eyes, more than once, flicked toward the grand piano sitting in the corner of the vast room. The Steinway stood like a sleeping giant, its polished ebony surface untouched all evening. It was a reminder of a world she had left behind, the world of music and promise. Years ago, Emily had been a prodigy. She'd spent her childhood locked in practice rooms, her fingers learning to coax melodies from the keys that now gleamed silently before her. She dreamed of concert halls, of standing ovations, of a life shaped by passion rather than survival. But life had other plans. Her father's illness had drained the family's finances, forcing her to leave the conservatory and take whatever jobs she could find. The scholarship that once kept hope alive was gone. Music became a memory, tucked away beneath the weight of bills and broken dreams. Victor Harrow was the epitome of everything Emily resented. The billionaire was larger than life, charismatic, ruthless, and completely sure of his place at the top. His voice carried through the room, commanding attention as he joked and boasted about his latest deals. To the crowd, he was a god. To Emily, he was a symbol of a world that didn't care about her kind. As the night wore on, Emily moved among the guests, serving with quiet efficiency but an aching sense of displacement. The piano remained silent, a symbol of the beauty and promise she no longer allowed herself to hope for. Then came the whispered news. The evening's pianist wouldn't be playing. A scheduling conflict, they said. A minor crisis, but one that left the party suddenly exposed, missing its soundtrack. Victor's irritation was visible. He didn't like things going wrong, especially not in his carefully crafted world. His eyes landed on Emily. A slow, calculating smile spread across his face. This was a chance, a cruel opportunity. Unaware of what was coming, Emily took a steadying breath, feeling that something about this night was about to change. The murmurs rippled through the room like a sudden chill. The pianist, the centerpiece of the night's entertainment, had canceled. The flawless event suddenly bore a crack, a flaw that no amount of expensive wine or polished smiles could cover. Victor Harrow's eyes narrowed, his usual easy charm replaced by a flicker of irritation. The party guests exchanged glances, the buzz of anticipation dipping for a moment. Victor barked an order to one of his assistants, demanding a quick solution. The room needed music, a performance to remind everyone of his power and prestige. That's when Victor's gaze landed on Emily. She was just carrying a tray, lost in the background like always. But there was something about the way she had glanced at the piano earlier, something that didn't go unnoticed by a man who saw everything as a game to control. "Wait," Victor called out sharply, making the room quiet enough for all to hear. "You there?" "Yes, you, the waitress." Emily froze mid-step. The entire room's attention shifted toward her. Victor's smirk grew wider. "You've been staring at that piano all night. You play." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. To them, it was a joke, a chance to watch a poor girl make a fool of herself under their watchful eyes. Emily's heart hammered in her chest. The question felt like a trap, but she knew there was no escaping the spotlight now. Victor leaned closer, voice dripping with arrogance. "Why don't you show us what you've got? Consider it your audition for entertainment. Or humiliation." Laughter bubbled up again, but beneath it was a tension Emily couldn't ignore. This was no longer a simple party, it was a battlefield, and Victor had just drawn his first line. She glanced at the piano, her old friend, her lost dream, and then back at the crowd. All eyes were on her, waiting. The moment that would change everything had arrived. Emily stood frozen in place, the weight of every gaze pressing down on her like a physical force. The room, filled with wealthy faces glittering with amusement and expectation, seemed to close in around her. Inside her, a storm raged, part fear, part disbelief, part simmering anger. Could she really stand up to this? Could she risk everything for a moment on a stage she'd abandoned so long ago? The stakes felt impossibly high. If she refused, she would cement the invisible wall separating her from this world forever. If she accepted, she would expose herself to ridicule, humiliation, and perhaps worse. Her mind raced back to the countless nights she had spent practicing in a cramped apartment, the echo of piano keys filling the silence. The way music had once been her refuge, her power. But that was a different life, a different world. Here, in this gilded cage, she was just a waitress, an invisible servant meant to blend into the background. What could she possibly do to prove herself against this crowd of polished elites? She thought about Victor's smirk, the way he relished the idea of breaking her confidence for sport. How many times had she seen people like him, powerful men wielding their wealth and status like weapons to keep others down? Yet, beneath the laughter and the jeers, a fire burned in her chest, a defiant refusal to be dismissed so easily. She had lost so much, but she hadn't lost everything. The music was still inside her, waiting, but doubt clawed at her. What if her fingers betrayed her? What if the memories of the piano had faded as much as she feared? What if this was all a cruel joke, and the world was right to look at her as nothing more than a waitress, a failure? The noise around her dimmed as she wrestled with herself. Part of her wanted to run, to vanish back into the shadows where dreams were safer. Another part, smaller but fiercer, whispered a different truth. This was her moment, however daunting, to reclaim not just the music, but her dignity. To show them all that talent and courage don't come with price tags or social status. They come from within. Her breath steadied. The room waited, Time slowed. Emily made her decision. She would play, not to entertain their cruelty, but to silence it. Emily's heart thundered as she stepped away from the serving station and toward the gleaming black piano. Every eye in the room followed her, the chatter fading into a tense silence. The air felt electric, charged with expectation and disbelief. This wasn't supposed to be her moment. She was supposed to be invisible, a background figure, no one's entertainment, no one's spectacle. Yet here she was, walking willingly into the spotlight Victor had thrown on her like a challenge. Her fingers trembled slightly as she approached the piano bench, but her resolve held firm. This was more than just a performance, it was a statement, a declaration that she would no longer hide in the shadows of other people's wealth and power. As she sat down, the polished surface reflected her face, a mixture of nerves, determination, and something else, a quiet, burning hope. Victor watched her with a new expression, a sharp gleam in his eyes. For the first time that evening, the air between them crackled not with mockery, but with challenge. The guests shifted uneasily, unsure whether they were about to witness a disaster or a revelation. Emily took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. The room held its breath with her. Then, as she pressed the first note, a wave of pure, effortless sound filled the space. The music was alive, rich, emotional, and powerful, filling the room with a beauty that cut through the skepticism like a blade. In that moment, Emily stepped fully into a new world, leaving behind the doubts and fears that had kept her hidden. She wasn't just the waitress anymore. She was the player, the artist, the one who could freeze a room with nothing but her talent. The game had changed, and she was ready. While Emily poured her soul into the piano, a quiet figure watched from the sidelines, Mira, the seasoned waitress who had shared her warnings earlier in the evening. Myra's eyes held something more than just curiosity. There was pride, tempered by years of hardship and survival. She understood better than anyone the risks Emily was taking. For Mira, who had spent decades navigating the invisible walls of wealth and privilege, Emily's courage was a spark of hope. Mira had always believed in talent beyond the walls she served, in dreams that refused to be crushed by circumstance. She had once dreamed of a different life too, before practicality and necessity pulled her into service work. Now, as she watched Emily, she saw not just a young woman playing piano. She saw a mirror of her own long-buried hopes, a chance at redemption through someone else's fire. This subplot of mentorship and quiet support added emotional depth to the story. Myra's presence reminded Emily and the audience that behind every underdog's fight, there are unseen allies. It was more than just a moment of music. It was a movement toward connection, trust, and perhaps the beginning of change. Meanwhile, Victor's arrogance began to crack as he observed Emily's growing command of the room. His power, once unquestioned, felt threatened by something intangible, raw talent, genuine emotion, and an unyielding spirit. The battle was no longer just between rich and poor, but between control and freedom, cruelty and courage. The B story brought warmth and contrast to the drama unfolding on the main stage. It deepened Emily's world, showed the stakes beyond just one performance, and hinted at the larger transformation that could ripple out from this night. As Emily's fingers found the keys, the atmosphere inside the Harrow estate shifted instantly. What began as a challenge designed to humiliate her transformed into a breathtaking display of raw talent and passion that stole the breath from the room. The guests, who had gathered in their tailored suits and glittering gowns expecting to watch a poor waitress stumble, were instead drawn into a spellbinding performance they would never forget. The clinking of glasses and murmured conversations faded into silence as the music filled the cavernous ballroom, wrapping around every corner with a mix of strength and vulnerability. The melody she played was not simply notes on a scale but a story told in sound. Every crescendo and decrescendo spoke of a life that had been shackled by circumstance yet refused to be broken. Emily's music captured the quiet desperation of nights spent practicing alone in a cramped apartment, the bittersweet ache of abandoned dreams, and the fierce hope that burned beneath the surface. Her performance wasn't about impressing the elite, it was a declaration of her existence, a proclamation that her voice mattered even if society had tried to silence it. Victor Harrow stood rigid at the edge of the room, his usual confidence replaced by an unfamiliar unease. His sharp eyes darted between the crowd's awestruck faces and the young woman whose fingers coaxed such haunting beauty from the piano. For all his money and power, Victor had never encountered anything like this. a force of nature unbound by status or privilege. His smirk faded as he realized this was not a spectacle he could control or dismiss. Around the room, the social dynamics began to crack. Some guests exchanged surprised glances, their earlier condescension replaced by respect. Others whispered quietly to one another, the realization settling in that Emily's performance had exposed a deeper truth, the value of authentic talent and the emptiness of their own curated personas. The party shifted from a mere gathering of wealth to a genuine celebration of artistry and courage. Emily herself felt the surge of energy coursing through her veins. Each chord she struck was a small victory over years of self-doubt and sacrifice. She played with reckless abandon and delicate precision, blending technical skill with emotional depth. Her music was a bridge between the person she had been and the woman she was becoming. It was a moment of transformation, both for herself and for everyone watching. The crowd was captivated. Some guests wiped away tears they hadn't expected to shed. Others sat forward, completely absorbed, as if experiencing the music for the first time. The piano no longer symbolized the divide between Emily and this world. It was the instrument of her triumph. Her hands moved with grace and power, telling a story that transcended social barriers. As the final notes lingered in the air, a hush fell over the room, pregnant with emotion. Then, gradually, applause erupted, first tentative, then growing louder and more enthusiastic. It was a standing ovation, heartfelt and unanimous. For many, it was a humbling reminder that true greatness often comes from the most unlikely places. Victor's eyes narrowed, his mind racing to reclaim control, but the damage was done. The game had changed irrevocably. Emily was no longer the invisible waitress. She was a force to be reckoned with. In that moment, she owned the room, and no amount of wealth or arrogance could erase what she had accomplished. This beat, the heart of the story's promise, showcases the joy, the thrill, and the emotional payoff of the underdog's journey. It's where Emily's hidden talents shine brightest, and the audience is drawn fully into her world, cheering her on as she defies expectations and rewrites her destiny. The last note hung in the air like a fragile breath, a perfect, shimmering moment suspended between two worlds. For a heartbeat, the room remained silent. No one dared to break the spell that Emily had woven with her music. Then, slowly but surely, the applause began. It started with a few hesitant claps, quickly swelling into a roaring ovation that shook the grand ballroom. Faces that had once sneered now looked at Emily with awe, respect, even disbelief. She was no longer invisible. She had seized the spotlight and refused to relinquish it. Victor Harrow stood stiffly, his jaw clenched so tight it was almost painful to watch. The air around him seemed charged with tension, the unspoken battle between pride and humiliation warring in his gaze. This moment was not just a performance, it was a reckoning. Victor's control, his carefully constructed empire of influence, was suddenly vulnerable in a way he had never anticipated. Emily's music had pierced through his armor, exposing the cracks beneath his polished facade. For Emily, the applause was intoxicating but also terrifying. This was the pivot point, no turning back now. The world had seen her true self, and the stakes had never been higher. She felt the rush of adrenaline mixed with the weight of expectations pressing down on her. She had entered the party as a mere waitress, underestimated and dismissed. Now she was a symbol of defiance and talent, a threat to the established order. The journey that had begun in shadows had brought her into the harsh light of truth. The crowd's energy shifted again as Victor recovered his composure. His eyes locked onto Emily, a cold fire burning in their depths. If this was a challenge, he was ready to escalate the game. He would not let this moment define him or his guests. He was a man accustomed to winning, to bending others to his will. But for the first time, he faced someone who refused to be controlled, someone whose strength was not measured in money but in spirit. This midpoint was the story's emotional fulcrum, the moment when everything changes. Emily's victory was undeniable, but it came with a price. The applause masked the coming storm, the backlash from those who would refuse to accept her rise. It was a turning point where the stakes intensified, where the underdog's path became steeper and more dangerous. Behind the scenes, alliances shifted. Some guests whispered their admiration, eager to distance themselves from Victor's arrogance. Others tightened their grip on old prejudices, ready to strike back at the girl who dared to challenge their world. The party, once a playground of power and privilege, now simmered with tension, the calm before a brewing storm. Emily's own mind raced. She knew this was only the beginning. The triumph of her performance was a beacon, but it also painted a target on her back. The path forward was uncertain, fraught with new challenges and betrayals. Yet, beneath the fear and doubt, a fierce determination burned brighter than ever. She would not be silenced. She would not retreat. The midpoint crystallized the theme. True power comes not from wealth or status, but from courage and authenticity. Emily's journey had shifted from survival to revolution. She was no longer playing a part. She was rewriting the rules of the game. And as the echoes of her music faded into the night, the world around her held its breath, waiting for what would come next. The intoxicating glow of Emily's performance began to fade as reality rushed back in with unforgiving force. The room that had just been swept away by her music now buzzed with a different energy, one charged with tension, suspicion, and subtle hostility. Victor Harrow's smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. He wasn't a man used to losing face, and Emily's triumph was a direct challenge to his carefully maintained kingdom of influence. Determined to regain control, he began to marshal his forces, setting in motion a plan to undermine her at every turn. Victor's first move was a series of whispered conversations with key guests, powerful allies who owed their loyalty to him. Behind the crystal chandeliers and polished silver, the wealthy elite exchanged glances filled with disdain and disbelief. To them, Emily was an upstart, a threat to the social order they'd built for themselves. The party that had seemed to celebrate talent now became a battleground of subtle sabotage and veiled insults. The laughter that had once been lighthearted now carried an edge, mockery disguised as charm, questions meant to undermine rather than understand. Meanwhile, Emily found herself increasingly isolated in the glittering crowd. The warmth of applause was replaced by cold stares and whispered doubts. The very people who had been captivated moments before now looked at her as an outsider, a reminder of the barriers they preferred to ignore. It was as if the room had collectively decided that her moment of brilliance was a mistake, something to be corrected rather than celebrated. Victor, sensing her growing vulnerability, intensified his efforts. He cornered Emily with thinly veiled threats masked as polite conversation. His words dripped with condescension, insinuating that her place was not among them, that she should be grateful for the crumbs of attention she'd been given. Yet beneath the surface, there was a darker intent, to break her spirit, to force her back into invisibility. Every gesture, every glance from Victor and his circle became a weapon aimed at her confidence. But Emily's inner fire refused to be extinguished. Despite the growing pressure, she held onto the memory of the music that had changed everything. She knew that Victor's power was built on fear and control, and that if she gave in now, she would lose more than a performance. She would lose herself. Her determination to fight back grew stronger with each challenge, fueled by the faces of those who believed in her, like Mira, who watched from the sidelines with quiet encouragement. The party, once a stage for opulence and frivolity, transformed into a crucible where Emily's resolve was tested. The underdog was no longer just playing a game. She was engaged in a war of wills. Victor's world, built on privilege and dominance, was closing in, tightening the noose. Yet beneath the threat lay the possibility of something greater, the chance for Emily to prove that courage and authenticity could disrupt even the most entrenched systems. As the evening wore on, the stakes escalated. Alliances hardened, whispers turned to accusations, and Emily's path forward became clouded with obstacles. The glamour of the party concealed the harsh reality. The battle for respect and dignity was far from over. But in the midst of the gathering storm, Emily's spirit blazed brighter than ever, ready to face whatever came next. The room seemed to close in around Emily like a suffocating cage, the weight of the night's events crushing her spirit. Despite her fierce determination, the relentless pressure from Victor and his circle had begun to erode the confidence she'd built with her music. Whispers that once held doubt now turned into sharp jabs disguised as polite conversation. The elite guests, who had moments ago been captivated by her talent, now turned their backs or gave her cold, dismissive glances. It was as if the brief spotlight she had claimed was nothing more than a cruel illusion. Victor, sensing victory, moved in with calculated precision. He publicly questioned her background with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, planting seeds of suspicion about her authenticity. "Are you sure she's really the talented pianist she claims to be?" he asked a few influential guests, his tone dripping with scorn. The room buzzed with uncomfortable murmurs. Emily's story, the struggles, the sacrifices, felt like a distant echo lost amid the laughter and the clinking of glasses. She was becoming a spectacle once again, but this time, not one of admiration. Her heart sank as a waiter accidentally spilled a drink near her, and no one rushed to help. She realized that the social barrier was more than just invisible, it was impenetrable. For a fleeting moment, Emily felt utterly alone, abandoned even by those who had seemed like allies. The crushing weight of isolation was her darkest moment yet. Her music, once a source of strength and solace, now felt like a distant memory, a language forgotten. She retreated to a quiet corner, her hands trembling and her mind clouded with doubt. How had it come to this? She had dared to dream, dared to step beyond her place, only to be pulled back down by the very people she had hoped to reach. The humiliation stung more deeply than any harsh word. It was the quiet erasure of her worth, the relentless insistence that she did not belong. As the party continued without her, Emily's soul felt fractured. The bright light of hope that had ignited earlier was now flickering, threatened by the overwhelming darkness of rejection. She questioned everything, her talent, her courage, her right to even try. The world seemed cruel and unyielding, and she wondered if she had been foolish to believe that music alone could change anything. But even in this abyss, a small spark refused to die. Beneath the despair, a faint heartbeat of resilience pulsed. Emily knew this was not the end, not truly. The path she had chosen was never going to be easy, and the price of standing up to power was steep. Yet, somewhere deep inside, she sensed that the moment of true breakthrough was still to come. This moment, all is lost, was the story's darkest hour. It was the point where hope seems extinguished, and the protagonist faces the crushing weight of defeat. But it also set the stage for rebirth, for the next surge of strength that would redefine Emily's journey. Emily sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen, the noise of the party fading into a distant hum. The clatter of dishes and muffled laughter from the grand ballroom were a cruel reminder of everything she had lost tonight. The weight of disappointment pressed down on her chest like a stone. She had dared to dream, dared to rise above her station, only to be crushed beneath the invisible but unyielding walls of privilege and power. The humiliation of Victor's public undermining and the cold dismissal from the guests echoed relentlessly in her mind. Her hands, which had moments ago danced so confidently across the piano keys, now trembled with uncertainty. She questioned every choice she'd made, every risk she had taken. Was her talent really enough? Was courage alone enough to break through the barriers that seemed so deeply entrenched? Doubt gnawed at her like a persistent shadow, whispering that perhaps she had been foolish to think she could change anything at all. The kitchen's harsh fluorescent light revealed the tired lines on her face, the shadows beneath her eyes. She thought of Myra's encouraging words earlier in the evening, the quiet belief in her potential that had felt like a lifeline. But even that light seemed distant now, swallowed by the overwhelming darkness. What if the world wasn't ready for someone like her? What if all the sacrifices, the late nights, the endless practice, were just stepping stones to a deeper disappointment? Tears welled in her eyes as memories of her past flooded in. The cramped apartment where she had practiced piano in secret, the long shifts serving tables while others lived their privileged lives, the loneliness of being unseen and unheard. It was a lonely road, and tonight felt like the culmination of every invisible defeat. The piano, once her sanctuary, now felt like a reminder of how far away her dreams really were. But amidst the despair, a flicker of something else began to emerge, a quiet strength born from the very depths of her pain. She realized that this moment, as dark as it was not the end. It was a crossroads. She could retreat into anonymity, let the world define her worth, or she could rise again, stronger and more determined than ever. The fire inside her, though dimmed, was not extinguished. Emily thought about the music, the way it had moved the room earlier, breaking through the walls of skepticism and arrogance. That truth was still there, waiting. The world might try to silence her, but her voice was real, and her talent undeniable. In the silence of the kitchen, Emily made a decision. She would not let this moment define her. She would face whatever came next with courage, not just for herself but for all those who had been told they didn't belong. The fight was far from over, it was only just beginning. This beat, the dark night of the soul, is the emotional low point, where the protagonist confronts their deepest fears and doubts. It's a moment of reflection and transformation, setting the stage for the final surge of courage and resolve. After hours of soul-searching in the quiet kitchen, Emily felt something shift deep within her. The dark night of doubt began to give way to a renewed sense of purpose. She wiped away the last traces of tears and stood tall, feeling a fierce determination ignite in her chest. This was her moment, not to retreat into silence, but to fight back with everything she had. The pain and humiliation she had endured were powerful, but they would not define her story. She was ready to step fully into the light. Emily's mind raced with possibilities. She could no longer play by the rules of Victor's world or the expectations of the elite. Instead, she would carve her own path, one built on authenticity, talent, and resilience. This break into the third act was not just a decision, it was a declaration. She would reclaim her dignity, not through confrontation or anger, but through the undeniable truth of her music and character. She recalled the look in Victor's eyes, his arrogance now tinged with fear. He had underestimated her from the start, assuming that a waitress was no match for his wealth and influence. But Emily knew better. Her power lay in her refusal to be invisible, in the courage to reveal her true self despite the risk of ridicule. This realization filled her with a quiet confidence that no amount of money or status could shake. With renewed focus, Emily began to plan her next move. She would not simply play the part that others wanted to see. She would show them the full depth of her talent and heart. The battle was no longer just about a single performance at a party. It was about rewriting the narrative of who she was and what she deserved. The transformation was palpable. Where once she had felt small and powerless, now she was a force ready to rise. The break into three marked the moment where the protagonist stops reacting to the world and takes bold, decisive action to change their fate. Emily was no longer waiting for permission or validation. She was claiming her future. As dawn approached, she felt a sense of calm determination settle over her. The stage was set for a finale that would not only surprise Victor and the guests, but would also affirm Emily's worth and strength. The journey had been grueling, but she was ready to finish it on her own terms. The morning after the party, Emily woke with a fierce clarity she had never felt before. The night's storm had passed, and what remained was an unshakable resolve to finish what she had started. This was no longer about proving herself to Victor or the guests. It was about reclaiming her identity and rewriting her story on her own terms. Every fiber of her being was focused on one thing, to make her final stand where it mattered most. She began by reaching out to Mira, her trusted friend and confidant. Myra's unwavering belief in Emily had been a constant light during the darkest moments, and now their partnership was more vital than ever. Together, they crafted a plan not just to showcase Emily's talent, but to expose the hollow arrogance of Victor's world, the very foundation that sought to keep her invisible. It was a bold strategy, one that would require courage, precision, and an unrelenting spirit. Emily's mind raced as she prepared. She knew the stakes were higher than ever, but the fear that had once threatened to consume her was replaced by a powerful determination. This finale wasn't just a performance, it was a reckoning. The world would finally see who Emily really was, beyond the facade of a mere waitress. Her music would become her voice, her defiance, and her ultimate victory. Back at the estate, the tension was palpable. Victor, confident as ever, had no idea what was coming. He believed he had quelled the disruption, unaware that Emily's true power was just beginning to rise. The guests, too, buzzed with anticipation, unaware that the final act would shatter their expectations and challenge everything they thought they knew. When Emily entered the grand ballroom once more, there was a moment of stunned silence. She was no longer the hesitant waitress forced into the spotlight, but a woman transformed, poised, confident, and radiating a quiet power that commanded attention. The piano, once a symbol of her vulnerability, now stood as a throne from which she would reign. As her fingers touched the keys, a hush fell over the room. But this time, the music was different. It was not just beautiful, it was fierce, bold, and unapologetic. Every note was a statement, a challenge to the status quo, a declaration that she would no longer be underestimated or silenced. The melody surged with passion and defiance, weaving through the air like a wildfire, igniting the hearts of everyone present. The guests, including Victor, were mesmerized. The arrogance in the room began to crumble as Emily's music tore down walls of prejudice and doubt. Her performance was a masterclass in both artistry and courage, a breathtaking culmination of years of struggle and perseverance. With each chord, she reclaimed her dignity, turning the party into a transformative experience that none would forget. The crescendo built, filling the grand ballroom with an intensity that left everyone breathless. Emily's fingers flew over the keys, precise and passionate, each note charged with the weight of her journey, the moments of doubt, the nights of practice, the sting of humiliation, and the fire of resolve. The music was no longer just sound. It was a story told without words, speaking directly to the souls of everyone present. Victor's confident facade cracked as he watched the crowd's reaction shift before his eyes. The guests who had once dismissed Emily now found themselves caught in the raw power of her performance. Their smug smiles faded, replaced by expressions of awe and respect. It was as if the music had revealed a truth they hadn't been ready to face, that talent and courage cannot be confined by social status or wealth. Among the listeners, Myra's eyes glistened with tears of pride. She knew this moment was about far more than a single performance. It was a reclaiming of identity and a dismantling of the barriers that had tried to keep Emily small. The energy in the room shifted palpably, the invisible chains of prejudice breaking under the force of pure, unfiltered talent. Emily's heart pounded not from nerves, but from a profound sense of liberation. For years, she had hidden her gift, fearing judgment and rejection. But now, standing in the center of a room full of skeptics, she was free to be seen and heard on her own terms. The music was her revenge, not fueled by bitterness but by the undeniable truth of who she was. As the final chords resonated through the room, silence fell once more. This time, it was not a stunned silence but one filled with reverence. Slowly, the guests rose to their feet, their applause thunderous and heartfelt. Emily's eyes locked onto Victor's, who sat frozen, his arrogance shattered, replaced by a grudging respect he could not hide. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Victor's attempt to embarrass her had backfired spectacularly, exposing his own insecurity and cruelty. In that moment, Emily was no longer the underdog. She was the victor. The party that had been meant to humiliate her became the stage for her triumph. The millionaire's arrogance was undone by the very talent he sought to belittle. As the applause continued, Emily felt a surge of emotion, joy, relief, and a profound sense of justice. She had not only proven herself to the world but, more importantly, to herself. Her journey had been painful and fraught with obstacles, but it had led to this undeniable moment of victory. The finale was more than a conclusion. It was a new beginning. Emily's music had broken through the walls of prejudice and pride, leaving behind a changed room and a changed woman. The echoes of her talent would resonate far beyond this night, a testament to the power of resilience, authenticity, and courage. The sun rose gently over the city, casting a warm glow on Emily as she walked down a quiet street, far from the opulence and judgment of the party. Her steps were steady and sure, carrying the confidence of someone who had faced darkness and emerged stronger. In her heart, the music still played, a song of resilience, hope, and undeniable talent that no one could silence. The waitress who had once been overlooked was now a woman who had rewritten her story with courage and grace. Behind her, the grand estate faded into the morning mist, a symbol of a world she no longer feared. Ahead lay an open road full of possibilities, waiting for her to claim them. Emily smiled softly, knowing this was just the beginning. The world had seen her true light, and now nothing could dim it. Her journey was far from over, but she was ready.